the perfect student. On a quiet Monday evening, as the University of Chicago campus emptied out and wine from the lake chased scraps of yellow leaves across the glass facade of the psychology department, Professor Rachel Moran remained alone in her office. The lamp above her desk cast a soft halo of light, framing a neat stack of printed student essays beside a cup of cold coffee. She was reviewing the final assignment for her Psychology of Empathy course. The prompt was simple. Describe how you recognize other people's emotions. When were you wrong? When were you right? Most students wrote superficially about facial expressions, tone, and body language. But one text stood out. Not for its style, it was dry, nearly impersonal, but for its content. When Jenna goes quiet in a group, it's not shyness. It's a way to be heard. She hopes someone notices her silence, and if you approach her alone, she'll tell you about a dream with a staircase that ends abruptly. She's afraid of being her sister's shadow, but she tells no one. Rachel set the page aside. The name Jenna stirred a recent memory. One of her students who had come to her last week seeking advice. Quiet, tense, eyes always lowered. She had spoken about dreams, staircases, and, yes, an older sister who was always better. But that conversation had been private and recent. Even if Jenna had confided in someone else, how did the author know such precise details? Why did they match so exactly? Rachel returned to the essay. It was unsigned. No name, no date. Only a small heading in fine print. Some things are only visible if you're afraid of them. She read the phrase several times, first as a metaphor, then as a warning, and suddenly noticed in the lower corner of the page, faint and half erased, was a name left over from a previous printout. Monsieur Lynn. Rachel frowned. She didn't know this student well, but somehow the name felt too familiar, like a question you've heard before, but can't quite place where or from whom. Michael Lynn sat by the window in the third row, always in the same checkered shirt and gray sweater. His laptop was old, with worn keys and no stickers. He never asked questions, never laughed at jokes, never arrived late or volunteered. He was the perfect student, so perfect that Rachel began to notice. Among the bright, loud, often overly confident students, he disappeared. Not literally, but the way background characters in a crowd vanish. You know they're there, but you couldn't recall a single face. Except, people remembered Michael and didn't know why. He turned in assignments a week early, never missed a lecture, and he always chose topics that tapped into other students' emotional pain points, as if he instinctively knew what each of them was going through at any given moment. When one student, Kevin, was going through a difficult breakup, Michael submitted a paper on the constructive illusion of reciprocity. When Tara's grandfather passed away, Michael wrote about the role of sudden loss in adult identity formation, as if he'd known it all in advance. At first, Rachel dismissed it as coincidence, then as emotional intuition, but over time it became unsettling. One day, she overheard Jenna whisper to a friend, "He knows. I don't know how, but he always knows." Michael remained silent as they said it in front of him. At the next lecture, he submitted an essay titled, "Invisibility as a Form of Protection." Rachel didn't know how to react. There were no accusations, no complaints, only observation, cold, precise, as if he didn't feel, but recorded, like a sensor wired into the emotional states of others. It was in that moment she first wondered, where does he get all this? And more importantly, why? At first, it all seemed like strange coincidences. Michael submitted essays that described students' emotions and behaviors, and days later, something would happen that confirmed his words. One or two instances, and Rachel might have ignored it, but there were too many. He wrote about the facade of fearlessness as a defense against panic, and a student named Lee suddenly dropped out, citing an anxiety disorder no one knew about. A week later came a paper titled "Emotional Anesthesia: When You Feel Too Much to Feel Anything." 3 days later, Tara, the quiet student in the back row, was hospitalized with a depressive episode. She confided in Rachel that she felt like she lived behind glass and was afraid of herself. Michael's texts didn't just guess at people's states, they anticipated crisis, as if he could sense the precise moment when a hairline crack was about to become a fracture. Rachel thought of Jenna then. A week earlier, Jenna had stayed after class, approaching the desk with a notebook in hand. Hesitantly, she asked if Rachel could recommend literature on invisible pressure inside groups. Social conformity theory, Rachel suggested. More like how you lose your voice even when you're silent on purpose, Jenna said, then quickly looked away as if she regretted saying it. She looked tired, but tried not to show it. Rachel had thought then, she has inner strength. I was wrong. Later, when she saw Michael's essay describing silent resistance, staircase dreams, and the fear of being a shadow, it was clear this wasn't abstraction. Rachel decided to speak with him. The questions were simple: how he chose topics, where he got his ideas. Michael answered without blinking. It's all written on them. Most people look to listen. I listen to see. It didn't sound poetic. It sounded troubling. Later, she learned that Michael approached students quietly, subtly, not as a friend, more like an observer. He made comments like, "You probably sleep badly when it rains. You hold your left hand when you lie. You're afraid of becoming your mother." Most dismissed it, but some, especially those on the edge, listened to him and made choices that seemed logical until everything got worse. Rachel began to understand. He didn't just observe, he intervened. But he did it as if he didn't know how not to, as if it was his only way of being needed. At first, it seemed like Michael wanted to help. His remarks sounded like concern, albeit in a strange form. He didn't pressure anyone, didn't demand. He simply said what he saw, and people acted. Kevin, a hesitant young man desperate for approval, constantly wavered between family expectations and his own desires. The day before his conversation with Michael, he sat in the library writing a letter to his parents. Long, disjointed, with edits in every paragraph. He asked them to stop pressuring him, to let him be himself. At the end, he added, "I love you, but I'm not your project." He never sent the letter, folded it up, slipped it into his backpack, and looked up. Michael was nearby, seemingly by chance. He wasn't looking directly at Kevin, more off to the side as if thinking aloud. "You've always been the good son. Even when you wanted to scream, you smiled, because you knew, otherwise they wouldn't believe you." Kevin flinched. He didn't respond, just gathered his things and left. 2 days later, he cut ties with his parents, accusing them of emotional control. A week after that, he was alone in the dorms, having panic attacks and failing his assignments. Later, he came to Rachel. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion and anxiety. "Funny thing," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes I think he just said what I was too afraid to say to myself." Then there was Emily, the always smiling student. Michael told her, "You don't have to be agreeable, even if you think they'll leave you otherwise." Emily fought with the boyfriend she was afraid to lose. He left, calling her paranoid. Emily withdrew, missed several lectures, stopped responding to messages. A friend later whispered to Rachel in the hallway. It started after she talked to Michael. Help became isolation. Advice became anxiety. And Michael delivered it without malice. On the contrary, with a childlike need to fix. Rachel began observing him more closely. She noticed he never paid attention to students' successes. He only noticed cracks, as if he calibrated his senses not to people, but to the potential failure points in their systems. And he always appeared just before the system collapsed. He once said, "I just give them what I wish someone had told me." And that was the tragedy. His help wasn't empathy. It was a mirror, projecting others' pain through his own. The question wasn't how he did it, but why he couldn't stop. Rachel understood. Michael wasn't interfering in other people's lives. He was trying to relive his own, each time through someone else's wound. She invited him to her office after class, informally, just to talk. Michael entered quietly without questions, and sat immediately on the edge of the chair, as if preparing for interrogation. His hands lay flat on his knees, spine straight. He didn't avert his gaze, but he didn't meet hers either. His eyes seemed to pass through the room. Rachel started gently. Michael, I've noticed that your essays often touch on very personal topics, sometimes too precisely. Is that intuition? Or are you speaking with someone? He shrugged. Barely. Then exhaled. They don't always hide it. People just don't want to look there. I don't know why I can. And you, do look? He nodded. I can't not look. Silence. Rachel felt torn between sympathy and unease. But Michael, after your conversations with other students, she chose her words carefully, many of them take drastic steps, sometimes destructive ones. Don't you worry that you're causing harm? He looked up. There was no aggression in his eyes, only exhaustion. I'm scared, always. But if I say nothing, it's worse. If I say something, it's worse. I don't know what's right. Then why do you keep going? He hesitated, his lips trembled, his eyes dropped again. I don't know how to stay quiet. When I see, no one ever told me anything when I needed it. It wasn't just an answer, it was a confession. That evening, Rachel submitted a request to the university archive. In an old file, she found a reference to Michael. Hospitalization during high school. Behavioral instability. Parents had complained about his obsessive need to interpret others' behavior. Therapist's note, unspecified anxiety disorder. The next day, she reached his mother by phone and heard a phrase that stuck in her mind. He always made things up, always imagined what wasn't there. You can't live your life constantly searching for what's hidden. Rachel hung up, and for the first time realized Michael wasn't saving others. He was still trying to save himself. Rachel called Michael's mother in the evening, once the university building had emptied. The woman answered immediately, her voice cold, precise. Mrs. Lynn, my name is Rachel Moran. I'm a psychology professor, and I teach your son. I've already spoken to psychologists, the woman interrupted. He just made things up. Always did. He could turn a paper cut into a 3-act tragedy. Don't call again. Dial tone. Rachel remained seated with the phone in her hand, feeling as if someone had slammed a door in her face. The next morning, she visited the university's psychological support archive. Upon request, she was given a file marked confidential. Inside the forms, some dated from high school, she found a doctor's note. Excessive hyperobservation. Behavioral pattern aimed at constant monitoring of adults' emotional climate. Emotional responses overly differentiated, resulting in a false sense of true meaning behind every action of others. Therapy recommended to rebuild personal boundaries and trust in own perception of reality. That same day, going through old student papers, Rachel stumbled upon a draft of one of Michael's essays. The handwriting was uneven, as if it hadn't been written for grading. When you're a child, you learn to feel what isn't said, to know when to be quiet, when to disappear. 2 days later, Rachel called again. This time, Michael's mother answered after the 4th ring. Her voice was different, tired even. Sorry for being harsh last time, she said. I'm just tired of it all, of people trying to turn him into some kind of mystery. Rachel stayed silent. He was always strangely perceptive, the woman continued, as if he didn't just listen, but decoded. Even as a kid, you'd say, I'm tired, and he'd ask, why are you angry? It was unnerving, especially from a child. A pause. We tried to straighten him out, taught him not to meddle in other people's business. He became quiet, tried very hard to be easy, but sometimes he'd snap, like he was scanning you with some emotional X-ray. It was unbearable. Sometimes I thought, her voice softened, he wasn't living for himself, but to make sure everyone else felt right, as if he was responsible for their emotions, even mine. After the call, Rachel sat in her office for a long time. Outside snow fell, slow, stubborn, like thoughts that refused to leave. And she understood something crucial. Michael wasn't an empath, or a prophet, or a boundary violator. He was a child of chronic mistrust, raised in an environment where feelings were denied, where emotions had to be guessed because no one acknowledged them. His hypersensitivity wasn't a gift. It was survival. He learned to read micro movements, pauses, the flutter of eyelashes, because that was how he sensed if home was safe. Now he did the same at university, trying to fix other stories in the way he could never fix his own. But he no longer knew where he ended and where another person began. Rachel realized, to help Michael, she didn't need to teach him how to feel. She needed to teach him how to stop. In spring, as the campus bloomed with color and students rushed to prepare for final exams, new flyers appeared on the bulletin boards: internships, research groups, summer programs. Rachel wrote a personal letter, not a formal recommendation, not an academic endorsement, but a quiet, deeply honest invitation. Michael, if you'd like to work as an assistant in the summer research group, we need you. Not as a mirror, not as a scanner, but as a participant. We'll be studying psychological mechanisms of behavioral anticipation. Your attentiveness, it's not a diagnosis, it's a gift, one that can be tamed. But participation requires mandatory sessions with a supervisor. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be honest. RM. Michael didn't reply right away. A week later, he walked into her office. Same sweater, same quietness, but his gaze had changed. No longer piercing, but searching. I'm not sure I can stay quiet, he said, eyes lowered. But maybe I can at least stop rushing. She smiled. That was enough. A summer park. Michael sits on a bench, notebook in hand. The pages are blank. People pass by, some arguing on the phone, others laughing, some crying into their sleeves. He doesn't analyze. He just watches. For the first time, with no agenda. A few meters away, a teenager argues with his parents. The words sharp, the voice rising. Michael tenses. He almost leans forward, almost stands, and freezes. He still sees pain, but for the first time, lets it stay someone else's. A child sits next to him on the bench, drawing with a marker on a scrap of newspaper. The sketch is messy but alive. Michael observes, doesn't intervene, doesn't try to fix. For the first time, he doesn't try to understand, only to be present. The wind flips a page in his notebook. He doesn't stop it, just lets it go. Maybe this is the beginning, simply not saving.